Good afternoon, everyone. I am Edward Alcordo, President of the Australian-Philippine Business Council. I will be the moderator for today's Philippine Market Insight Seminar. May we begin with acknowledgement of country. In the spirit of reconciliation, we wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to their elders past, present, and future, and extend the respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. I welcome you all to the Philippine Market Insight Seminar. This seminar is about providing exporters with market intelligence, identifying the risk, prospects, exploring the current economic and political conditions, as well as highlighting the growing sectors and demand within the Philippines. This insight comes from our expert panelists whose experience and expertise in the Philippines will add enormous value to our discussion. Having the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the Philippine Embassy, APBC, the private sector representatives joining us today means that we're able to provide you with a holistic briefing of the Philippines. I'd like to welcome our distinguished speakers. They are in order of appearance. His Excellency Stephen Robinson, AO Ambassador to the Philippines from the Australian Embassy, Manila. Her Excellency Maria Hellen de la Vega, Ambassador to Australia from the Embassy of the Philippines in Canberra. Okay. Susan Jenkin, CEO of Ironbark Citrus, an Australian exporter of premium mandarins. And Neil Grimes, Managing Director of Plentex Limited, an Australian investor involved in integrated agribusiness projects. We have an impressive panel. Their bios have been circulated, so please peruse them at your convenience.
A very warm welcome to everyone joining this Market Insight Seminar on the Philippines today. The Philippines is one of Australia's longest standing bilateral relationships, and this month we celebrate 75 years of diplomatic ties. Our strong and enduring friendship is grounded in shared values and strong people-to-people links. The Philippines is a dynamic and vibrant economy, and boosting our bilateral trade and investment is vital to creating jobs across both countries. Capturing new and diverse market opportunities will help our economies bounce back from the pandemic. Australian and Philippine government senior officials met recently and identified potential opportunities to grow bilateral trade and investment, including in agriculture, education, and the digital economy. I commend today's high-calibre speakers who will promote some of those opportunities to you and help you understand and navigate risks. I encourage all Australian businesses to view our overseas diplomatic network, including Australian Ambassador Stephen Robinson and Austrade, as a resource to draw on. I extend my appreciation to Philippine Ambassador Helen de la Vega and Australia-Philippines Business Council and the two Australian businesses, Ironbark Citrus and Plentex Limited, for supporting this important event. I welcome these partnerships as we grow the success of Australia's business in the Philippines for our mutual benefit. I'm committed to strengthening the economic relationship with the Philippines and look forward to the time when I can visit. Thank you.
The seminar will run as follows. The first area of focus will be on the economic and political landscape of the Philippines, as well as business conditions and export opportunities with Ambassador Robinson. We will then move on to hearing about the investment opportunities for Australian businesses in the Philippines with Ambassador de la Vega. Following this, I'll invite Susan Jenkins from Ironbark Citrus to share her perspective as an Australian exporter. We will then hear from Neil Grimes of Plentex, who will discuss his experience within the Philippines. Finally, we'll go to the panel discussion where I'll ask our panelists questions. These questions we receive in advance from you, our audience. Before we talk about the economic and political landscape and business conditions, export opportunities to the Philippines, a brief introduction about Ambassador Stevenson. Ambassador Stephen Robinson, AO, is one of Australia's most experienced diplomats. His assignment to the Philippines is a strong signal of how important Australia views our bilateral relationship between the two countries. He's the kind of person who gets information firsthand, whether it's in the remotest parts of Mindanao, the boardrooms of Makati, or the inner sanctums of Malacanang Palace. Ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador Stephen Robinson.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. That was tremendous, Ed. I really much appreciate it. And I'll start, if that's all right, just to acknowledge yourself, Ed. Thank you for the fine work that you do as the President of the APBC, and also my colleague in Canberra, Ambassador Hellen de la Vega. It's a pleasure, as always, to see Helen with us this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll commence with a bit of an overview of the political and economic situation. The COVID situation in the Philippines is serious but stable. While the government is focused on opening the economy, this will be tempered by the number of current cases that it's experiencing. The Philippines has been one of Southeast Asia's top performing economies over the last decade. However, in 2020, the economy contracted by 9.6% due to the pandemic. The ADB, World Bank and IMF predict the Philippines will experience a gradual recovery. Current growth forecasts are for between 4.5 to 6.9% in 2021 and 6 to 6.5% in 2022. The Philippines has really good economic managers that have been able to reform the economy throughout the pandemic, and recent legislation such as CREATE reduces corporate income tax to 25% and streamlines incentives. And the government is also pursuing liberalisation of public services, retail trade and foreign investment. Now, interestingly, many Australian companies in the Philippines are really doing well, notwithstanding the pandemic and associated lockdowns, and they view the future most positively. We have over 300 Australian companies operating in the Philippines, and they employ over 44,000 Filipinos in business process outsourcing, in infrastructure, financial services, ICT, and the energy sectors. These businesses really benefit from the Philippines' young, well-educated, English-speaking talent pool. Now, in terms of trade and investment, overall goods trade between our countries was down 20% in 2020, but there are some promising trends. Now, dairy exports rose 24% to $95 million last year. Fruits and nuts exports rose 15% to $54.5 million. And the imports of Philippine agricultural products were up by 8% to $99 million. Soap increased 2.5 times to $8 million, and computers grew by 2% to $37 million. Now, we continue to promote and expand the two-way investment relationship between Australia and the Philippines. And while investment data for 2020 is not yet available, total Australian investment in the Philippines increased 7.6% in 2019 to over $10 billion, to be precise, $10.2 billion. Now, through our high-level and strategic engagement with key Philippine conglomerates, we are supporting them too to expand in niche areas to secure their supply chains and access advanced products and technology, particularly with regard to renewable energy and agribusiness. And now I'd like to say something about our resilient commercial ties, because Australian companies have had success in major developments in the Philippines. And I'll just run through some of these because it's pretty impressive. The interior design of the new terminal at the Clark International Airport, as well as the Philippine Arena, that was done by Populous. The construction of the 4-lane Cavite Laguna Expressway, that was done by Leighton Asia. The engineering and architecture for the Manila-Clark Railway Project, the North-South Railway Project and the South Line. The detailed design for the new Government Administrative Centre in New Clark City, and tunnelling for the new Clark City, all done by BMD Construction. And providing advice to most PPP transactions in the Philippines has been Macquarie Capital. So as you'll see, we've got Australian companies are also actively exploring opportunities in digital services, including solutions to expand e-commerce platforms, to improve cybersecurity, and to boost online education. And in terms of education, Australia is the #1 preferred destination for Filipino students in 2019, and there were 17,000 Filipinos studying in Australia, and that's really impressive. These students, along with our more than 300,000 Filipinos living in Australia, also support our tourism links, which were booming before the pandemic, and we hope to see pick up in the not too distant future. Australia too and Australia and the Philippines are both members of the ASEAN Australia-New Zealand Free Trade Area and the newly signed RCEP. These agreements mean that 99% of our goods trade is tariff-free. In practice, this has meant that Australia is the Philippines' top source of beef and lamb, second top source of wines, top supplier of fresh table grapes, citrus and stone fruit, and the 6th top source of dairy. So as you can see, Australian food products are readily available in most supermarkets, such as Rustan's, Robinson's and Landers and others. And we're pleased too that the Woolworths brand is now available in the Philippines. So let me just wrap up with some comments about business opportunities and developments in the market. Now, looking forward, we really are optimistic about the future trajectory of the Philippine economy and the opportunities for Australian businesses. The pandemic has fast-tracked digital adaptation, including e-commerce. More consumers, retailers, and consumer-oriented businesses are pivoting towards mobile e-commerce. Now, the Philippines has got over 108 million people, half of whom are under 25 years old. So digitalisation will continue unabated. There remains considerable appetite for Australian agri-food, especially beef, fruits and vegetables, and dairy among the middle classes. There are also fintech opportunities to develop the Philippines' electronic payment ecosystem, and most e-commerce transactions are still conducted by cash on delivery, but that's changing. While international education has been severely disrupted by the pandemic, we remain committed to our education partnership with the Philippines. And even during the pandemic, the Philippines is the 9th largest source of international students in Australia, growing by 17.7% in 2020. And there is appetite too among professionals and companies to upskill or reskill their workforce, with opportunities for Australia to provide professional development training. The government is also encouraging clean energy such as natural gas, solar, hydro and hydrogen energy. The Philippines is actually targeting 34,000 megawatts of renewable energy by 2040. And this will present engineering and consulting and subcontracting opportunities for Australian companies and natural gas suppliers. In February 2021, the Department of Energy and Star Scientific signed an MOU on a feasibility pilot project to convert coal power plant turbines to hydrogen energy. So we've seen an increase in demand for innovative health solutions and digital health expertise as well in the Philippines, not only in response to the current pandemic, but to prepare for future outbreaks of emerging diseases. Now, Australia is well placed to provide technical support and share best practices from Australian experience. Big data and cybersecurity in health are also key points to consider in building an integrated health ecosystem. So overall, we really do view the Philippines as a country with distinct promise for Australian investors. So to all you investors out there, please get amongst it and come up to the Philippines. It's the place to be. Thanks very much.
Thank thank you very much, Ambassador, for those very insightful comments. So now we move on to investment opportunities for Australian businesses in the Philippines. Ambassador Helen de la Vega is a career diplomat, well respected in Canberra, not only as ambassador of the Philippines, but also for her work with ASEAN. She received the Order of Sikatuna with the rank of Datuk for her role in the Philippine chairmanship of ASEAN in 2018. Now, over to you, Ambassador Helen.
Thank you. The ever-dynamic Australian Ambassador to Manila, His Excellency Stephen Robinson, Mr. Ed Alcordo of the Australian-Philippine Business Council, Ms. Susan Jenkins of Ironbark Citrus, Mr. Niall Grimes of Plentex, Philippine Special Trade Representative Alma Argayoso, Australian Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner Christopher Lim. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from Canberra. Thank you, DFAT and the Export Council of Australia for organizing this seminar. Both governments were intent on having a business seminar to coincide with the 75th anniversary of the diplomatic relations this year, and we are here now. And I'm glad that Australian Ambassador Stephen Robinson referred to the speech of Minister Tihan, where he mentioned about the Philippine-Australian Trade Industry and Investment Dialogue held last month between our senior trade officials, where we saw a significant synergy of goals and priorities. Through this seminar, I hope that we are casting our nets even wider to encourage fresh and continuing conversations on doing business, creating jobs, and leading our countries towards recovery. On our Philippine economy, like Australia, the Philippines was fortunate to have entered the crisis from a position of strength. We had very strong economic fundamentals, growing at an average of 6.6% from 2016 to 2019, and low and stable inflation rates. Our fiscal position was robust, with credit ratings in the range of 3B plus to A minus, and unemployment rate of 5% in 2019. The Philippines was the second fastest growing economy in ASEAN, projected to be an upper middle income country by 2020 if COVID-19 did not happen. Now, what is the situation now? COVID-19 situation and response. The pandemic continues to be a significant challenge for my country, where we breached the 1 million mark of cases in the end of April. However, over 90% of these cases have recovered, and the mortality rate is 1.6%. Again, similar to Australia, the Philippines implements lockdowns when needed, as well as travel restrictions to manage the health crisis and response. And I take this opportunity to assure you that we are serious about battling COVID-19, and we thank Australia for its support, including the vaccine access assistance that it has extended to the Philippines. As of May 5, over 2.1 million vaccine doses have been administered, with more than 342,000 Filipinos fully vaccinated. So, how does our economic recovery plan show, or the pathway for it? We remain to be committed to a safe reopening of the economy, and our aim is to build back better and implement rebuild. Rebuild means revitalizing businesses, investments, livelihoods, and domestic demand programs. This plan aims to revitalize consumption and enhance production capacity, combined with government support to stimulate the economy, enhance production capacities in the agriculture, industry, and services sector to help build our export competitiveness and manage imports. The infusion of foreign direct investments plays a dual critical role in our country's economic development. It addresses the supply chain gaps in production, and it also provides the physical and digital infrastructure to enable the modernization of Philippine industries. Net inflows of FDI in the country surged by 41.5%, reaching $961 million in January 2021 from $679 million a year earlier. This demonstrates renewed confidence in the Philippines and its recovery plan. It is consistent with business confidence recorded at 17.4% in the first quarter of 2021 from only 10.6% in the fourth quarter of 2020. Last year, we launched the Make It Happen in the Philippines, and I don't know, maybe some of the viewers of this seminar right now participated in that Make It Happen in the Philippines campaign, to highlight the Philippines' strength and adaptability to weather current challenges. The campaign focuses on 5 priority sectors which we believe have the most potential for foreign investment. 1, automotive, and our well-established industry is already integrated with the global value chains, and the presence of over 300 companies manufacturing automotive parts and components. The Philippines is ready to meet rising demand for automotive assembly parts and manufacturing in Asia Pacific and beyond. There are synergies and continued industry diversification from automotive to aerospace parts, electronics, and others, and the industry is likewise supported by government initiatives on innovation and the use and manufacture of electrified vehicles. Second sector, electronics. We have a presence of 500 global semiconductors and electronic companies with strong capabilities in test, packaging, and assembly of semiconductors. Some of the opportunities include manufacturing of auto electronics, advanced driver assist systems, components, engineering services outsourcing, R&D, electric motor powertrains like battery, EV, metal casting, machining, forging, and many others. Third sector is aerospace. Why? We are in the center of the aerospace value chain in the Asia Pacific and perfectly positioned to serve as a hub for manufacturing and aftermarket services in the aerospace industry. Opportunities include manufacturing of flight control actuation systems, servo actuators, servo valves, gallery inserts, structures and equipment, seat parts, lavatories, interior fit out, panel assembly, airframes and sub-assemblies, as well as maintenance, repair, and operations MRO services. Next sector is copper. Copper shines in one of the highly mineralized countries in the world, and the Philippines has approximately 4 billion metric tons of copper reserves, and with multiple methods of extraction, the country is well placed to manufacture and export a wide range of copper goods, such as copper ore, anodes and cathodes, copper wires, cables, harnesses, tubes, pipes, rods, refined copper, and alloys. The industry seeks full integration from mining to downstream processing by 2030 through the Leyte Ecological Industrial Zone, where the only copper smelter in the country is based. Fifth, business services. I think everybody knows this, that the country is the #1 destination for IT business process outsourcing services. We have the edge when it comes to voice or call center services, engineering services outsourcing, data analytics, legal process outsourcing, health information management, animation and game development, IT service, global in-house services embedded in manufacturing. Australian companies may also wish to explore other opportunities listed in our 2020 Investment Priorities Plan, and this IPP provides investors with a set of incentives to qualified businesses. By participating in these strategic sectors, investors are assured of the Filipinos' well-known trait of resilience, roll up your sleeves, make it work mindset that makes us a unique and attractive investment destination. The Philippines is suited for the expansion or relocation of Australian business given our large and young population, world-class Filipino talent across all sectors, including highly viable investment sector for innovation and startups, state-of-the-art technology such as high-tech machinery and robotics, rich biodiversity and abundant natural resources, free trade agreements with its trading partners and strategic location, making the country the preferred gateway of investors to the ASEAN region and the world. So while Australia is looking at trade diversification right now, please consider these positive points. This administration pursued policy and structural reforms, including difficult ones, in support of economic growth. This year, and Ambassador Robinson referred to this, we passed CREATE Act that brings down corporate income tax for micro, small, medium enterprises from 30% to 20% and 30% to 25% for large enterprises. Qualified projects under the Strategic Investments Priorities Plan can also enjoy incentives package for a maximum of 17 years These include 4 to 7 years of income tax holiday, 5% special corporate income tax rate of 5 years for domestic market enterprises, and 10 years for export-oriented enterprises. The Philippines offers a set of competitive fiscal and non-fiscal incentives to jumpstart qualified projects from infancy to maturity of business operations. Efforts are underway to continue creating a business climate attractive to foreign investments. In closing, the past year has been difficult for all of us. It's really been difficult for all of us. However, the only way that we can take is to move forward. The embassy and our trade office are here to respond to your questions and assist you as you make that decision to make it happen in the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Certainly, you provided a very compelling argument and obviously a compelling reality for trade and investment in the Philippines. Now we move on to Susan Jenkins, who will talk with us about her experience as an exporter into the market with Ironbark citrus mandarins. Susan, will you please share your export journey into the Philippines and some of the unique aspects of exporting to the Philippines?
Thank you very much, and thank you for your inviting me to speak with everybody here today. We're a family-based business in Queensland, and we specialise in growing and packing mandarins for export. We were set up with export in mind, and we have been exporting successfully for over 25 years, predominantly into the ASEAN region, but as well as China, Taiwan, Japan, Middle East and Sri Lanka. Marketing to the Philippines is very much part of our diversified marketing strategy. We find each market has different preferences as to timing, price, grade and variety, so we try and place the fruit where it will be most accepted. We pride ourselves in our mandarins' quality and freshness and our clean and sustainable production techniques. As a family business, our management has direct control over the harvest, packing, cooling and container loading of our mandarins, so our fruit travels directly from our farms to the port. Now we export around 300 containers, 40-foot containers a year, and expect half again in the next 5 years as our younger farms come into production. We have been trading with the Philippines since the market opened to Australia 4 years ago. There's a close relationship between Philippines and Australia that has enabled early development of this business. The Philippine market is important to us for a number of reasons. First of that is the timing. Our early season fruit arrives when there's very little citrus in the Philippine market, and it's before the arrival of citrus from our major competitors, Argentina and South Africa. So we have that little small market window to ourselves. Citrus consumption is important for Philippine families. Many families see consuming citrus as essential for maintaining good health. Therefore, there's a very good acceptance of the different varieties that we ship, and allows us a long supply window all the way through from May till September. There's also acceptance of all grades in the different sections of the market, so we can ship premium, we can ship second grade, and we can find someone who'll be looking at that area of the market. There's a historical preference for Australian product with some of our importers because our fruit is trusted, because our reputation for that growing healthy, clean, quality fruit. Ease of doing business, of course, is another factor. We have excellent business partners in the Philippines who work with us and are willing to work together with us to solve the inevitable problems that you have when you try to export fresh fruit. There's great potential to increase trade in the Philippines, which has already been mentioned, with that growing middle class who can actually afford our product, which is a quite expensive product. We do have some challenges, of course. The first challenge for us is price points. Philippines is a price-sensitive market and our fruit is expensive. This is because Australia has a very high cost base and the fruit is expensive to produce. The market's also quite sensitive because of this price point. The market's also quite sensitive to currency fluctuations, so an increasing Australian dollar can make our fruit too expensive for the market. Our mid-season fruit competes with cheaper fruit from Argentina and South Africa. And this season we expect to see a little bit of an impact from the opening up of the market to the South African mandarins. Many of our importers do move to a cheaper product when they become available. The second point I think is a problem is the limitations of cold chains in Philippines. Short cool chains mean fruit has to be sold very quickly after leaving the importers' cool rooms. And there's limited shelf life after the cold chain's broken. Most importers tell us they like to sell the fruit within 3 to 4 days and a maximum of 7, which is quite a small window for them to sell the fruit. So that means then that their customers will buy in smaller quantities and replenish more frequently, which must increase the congestion around the port quite a lot, I'd imagine. Supermarkets also have limited cool room space for storage, and because of the cost of power, they often turn off their store aircon overnight, which means that inside the supermarkets, the temperatures actually can rise quite considerably overnight, which again affects the shelf life of your fruit. COVID-19, of course, has had an effect on the trade in significant shipping delays and cancellations, which leading to longer transit times, which again affects our arrival quality, the shelf life and the sales programs. Lockdowns in the Philippines do affect in-country transport of fruit from port to the regions. I just want to talk a little bit about market promotions. It's an integral part of what we do, and the Philippines is one market where we have focus. We run promotional activities and market research in both 2019 and 2020, and these activities have been supported by our Trade and Investment Queensland grant, and we also contributed ourselves, and our Australian-based exporters also contributed. Austrade has and continues to provide excellent management services and on-ground support, and I'd have to give special mention to Patricia De Mesa, whose professional support and creative input is outstanding. And she seems to have excellent connections with the Philippines consumer research organisations, and it's been fantastic. In 2019, we conducted consumer research, some importer and general market research, and a small cool chain investigation to find out what actually happens, and a well-received trial in-store promotional program in some selected supermarkets. Of course, 2020 required a great change of direction because of the COVID, and we had a season launch planned and further market research activities planned, which we'll have to delay until the lockdowns slow down a bit and the restrictions are eased. We focused on several short, small social media campaigns using Facebook and Instagram, and several small influencers, and linking them with the participating supermarkets and online presences. And this was really surprisingly very successful. Planning is commenced for our larger social media campaign this year. We certainly hope to be able to continue and build on these promotional activities in future years, and to expand our trade with the Philippines. It's been a market that's been very good to us, and we hope to be there in the long term. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Susan. And you're quite right. Citrus is important for good health. Okay. Now, we move on to Neil. I'd like to invite our final speaker, Neil Grimes of Plentex, to speak. Neil, please share with us your insights on developing a presence in the Philippines and how you've expanded your business through investing in the market. Neil?
Good morning, rather good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are. Thanks to Ed Alcordo, President of the APBC, Ambassador de la Vega from the Philippines Embassy, and Stephen Robertson from the Australian Embassy in Manila, and also to my colleague Susan. Thank you very much for your presentation. And for everyone who has organised today's event, also thank you very much, much appreciated. It's a pleasure speaking with you today. I was to be in Manila this month, but travel bans have interfered with that. And even though I've been well supported by DFAT and DFA and the BOI and the DTI, to get all the necessary permissions. COVID runs its own schedule, but thanks to Alma Agayoso in Sydney, I'll get there very soon. Personally, I've had a long association with the Philippines. First visited Manila in 1992 with Western Mining Corporation, doing an internal audit on the Tampakan copper gold project in Mindanao. Had my 29th birthday there, so you can all do the maths. And we've had family visits there as well in that time. In 2012, I joined Indophil as the EGM of Corporate Development, working on the Tampakan copper gold project with Glencore and Xstrata, and we sold that to Olson's in 2015. During this time, I was also a director of the APBC, and thank you, Ed, for engaging me with that. I had a great time working with you from 2014 to 2019. I started my own firm, Manor and Partners, in 2015 and was engaged in early on by Rizal Resources on the Taboli gold mine in South Cotabato, and also by Plentex Limited. And since then, I've been a very regular traveller to the Philippines. So talking about Plentex specifically, it's focused on agri-processing and aquaculture development in the Philippines. And we've had a number of projects there for some years now. The strategic pull is all about aquaculture in Western Samar, supported by agri-processing, food production and aquafeeds projects in Tacloban. Food production will be engaged this year in our phase 1 rice and cassava processing. Coconut processing will be in phase 2, and the waste products from both of those different processes will be used in aquafeeds or for biomass fuel in our dryer. Aquaculture processes will be developed in parallel with those. We also have R&D into specific seaweed varieties, that is Halimenia, for food and also high-value chemical extracts. We're in partnership there with University of Philippines Diliman campus and the Marine Research Foundation. We've got encouraging results now, and we're heading into the sea trial stage for that. We also have R&D into protein-enhanced feeds based on cassava and sweet potato, which could replace large amounts of soybean importation for feeds, and we're working on that with the UP Visayas and Tarlac Agricultural University. We've had exceptional results in this, which could be a major benefit to feed manufacture. Our R&D has also been supported by USAID and STRIDE grants, and also funding directly by Plentex. We're in the Philippines because of long-standing personal relationships. Mike McMahon, our Executive Director of Philippines Operations, is a Tacloban Typhoon Yolanda survivor and was producing milkfish there before the typhoon. The Philippines offers high-quality local farmed produce, healthy land and coastal waters, access to high-quality technological and research expertise, lower operating costs, of course, and access to ASEAN markets. New business relationships are forming because we are there, leading to complementary business opportunities and potential business expansion. Financing, though, has been a significant challenge. Foreigners and foreign companies usually arrive with all the necessary capital. It's just a matter of finding a partner. Plentex had established its local companies very early and self-funded the early stages, including purchase of land through our real estate affiliate company, Plentex Realty. We aim to find local capital to develop the local projects, but banks in the Philippines are reluctant to lend, even with the collateral well exceeding the necessary funds. Australian banks have also been uninterested in overseas collateral. After many banks and many meetings with potential financiers, we started searching for the right local partner. That's where we found AgriNurture, or ANI, a Philippines-listed company. Finding the right partners is the key to doing business in the Philippines for sure. ANI is a good company focused on sustainable, fresh, healthy food farming, production and delivery across the Philippines. You might know them through their brands of Big Chill or FCA, Fresh Choice Always, or Tully's Coffee. Our deal was done in 2018 for project funding, where ANI will eventually come to own 60% of Plentex. Funding processes have been ongoing since then, although we've had a severe delay impacted by COVID, of course, but now we're almost ready to start construction and begin operations. Philippines government departments can be helpful, but some are quite bureaucratic and slow-moving and have some unusually repetitive processes. Some have very good policy incentives, but difficult compliance and slow response renders some of these policies actually unobtainable. and that includes some policies from Department of Agriculture and others. We were successful in registering our Plentex agri-milling business with the BOI, the Board of Investments. Excellent incentives are available, and it took about a year to achieve, but the BOI people were very supportive through that process and remain so. So thank you to the BOI. The Australian Embassy in Manila has always been supportive and welcoming, ready with good advice and regular follow-up, along with the Philippines Embassy in Canberra and their consulates in Sydney and Melbourne. They've always been helpful and a very good place to go for advice on processes and requirements. The next 6 months for Plentex is focused on finalising our funding, completing construction and commencement of operations for our rice and cassava processing plant, and that will of course support local farmers, local job creation, employment opportunities with us, and food availability. The rice importation is also going to be part of the business, and we'll distribute that rice and also involve ourselves in the Agri-Nurture's Big Ma corn and rice product development. Our R&D projects will continue with our university partners, and we'll work on the commercialisation and scale-up of those two particular projects, which have enormous potential. We'll continue to advance our aquaculture towards growing and marketing of saltwater tilapia in partnership with BFAR, the Bureau of Fisheries up there, and also growing finfish at our Villarreal property in Western Samar. And finally, and more importantly to our shareholders, is we'll be looking towards an ASX IPO later this year, which will fund the next stage of coconut processing and also the possible acquisition of Agri-Nurture's Queensland-based vegetables and fruit processing business. Thank you very much for your attention, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Neil, and we obviously look forward to the float at the ASX. Without further ado, let's now proceed to our Q&A. As part of this segment, I'll ask each panelist a question that has been collected from our registrations. Panelists individually have 3 minutes to give your response. The first question is to Ambassador Robinson. I think most of the questions you touched on earlier, Ambassador Steve, but maybe you could make comment about the timing. So the question is this: what are the current sentiments of Australian businesses in the Philippines? What are they doing now in this COVID situation? And what is their outlook post-COVID? And just to add maybe to that, something to the effect that, if they are to invest some more or trade some more, when is the timing? Thank you.
Right. So thanks very much, Ed. So one of the things that we've been doing over the last 3 months or so is talking to key Australian companies that are doing business in the Philippines, just to try and get a sense of how they've been going during the pandemic. And the most interesting thing we found is that most have actually experienced that they've grown during 2020. Some have stayed stable, but many have actually done really quite well despite the pandemic. So we're anticipating that the positive economic growth that's going to occur over the next 6 months and longer will start to really move things forward in 2022, particularly as people get inoculated here in the Philippines. And so we've reached out to lots of Australian businesses on the ground, so Telstra, ANZ, and all the members of the Australian New Zealand Chamber of Commerce. And they've partnered with industry groups like the Makati Business Club and ICTSI, which owns 60% of Melbourne's port and owned by Ricky Rezai up here, to secure vaccines for their employees. So that's a really positive thing. The other thing that's going to help too as we go out towards the end of 2022 and 2023 is the election, because that's going to have a really positive impact on the economy through higher consumer and business spending. And so we're anticipating a further push. So, despite the pandemic, the Philippines has been making really good efforts to improve the ease of doing business. And it's also taken steps to streamline the registration of businesses. So while there's some foreign equity restrictions remaining, I'm optimistic given the push that's being made to open public utilities, retail and a range of other sectors, that now is actually the right time. So you asked the question about when. I think the time is now, because what we're seeing is you want to be on the ground floor as the economy starts to take off again, and that's what we're looking at now. So the economy's coming around and it's starting to take off. As we get into 2023, we're really looking at it speeding up considerably. You want to be established and ready to go. So let me just say a couple of other things. There's been some weak consumer demand that has affected the speed of the Philippines economy, but there's three sectors that I'd look at that are showing really solid fundamentals and really positive signs for the future. So one of the things that's also important is remittance flows in the Philippines. Now, that we thought was going to take a major hit. It hasn't. And it's actually picked up, so that's a good thing. And we're seeing many people now starting to increase the amount of money coming back into the Philippines. So that's a real positive. And at the height of the pandemic last year, there was some BPO sectors that were performing even better than 2019. And I've been talking to some of them here, and they've actually taken on additional work during the pandemic, which has seen them really increase their revenues. So that's really good. And their revenues over the last year, in some ways, have been 7.1% higher than the previous year. The other thing to mention is the infrastructure spending. Now, the government's got this build program, which is forecast to increase 14.8% year on year to take up to 5.4% of the GDP. So that's really important. And so as we get the number of cases of COVID trending down, and that's where it's heading now, we're sitting at around, it sounds alarming for Australians, but 6,000 cases a day. That's much better than the 12,000 we had 2 months ago. So things are looking good. And of course, the AstraZeneca and other vaccines coming in from the COVAX facility that we've supported have arrived in Manila over the last couple of months. And we've got another big delivery on the 8th of May. So as all that comes together in private sector, like ICTSI, Ricky Razon and Go Negocio, Joey Concepcion, bring in further vaccines, the situation's going to improve, and that will see the economy further opened up. Just a couple more things to say. I had a chat to Ricky Razon just last week, which was a fascinating conversation. And so he's looking at the Philippines recovery really taking off in the last quarter of this year and into early 2022, and he's a very astute businessman. So we're looking at, private sector participation in the Philippines remaining strong and continuing to grow. And so over the last 12 months, we've seen big Philippine businesses, despite internal business struggles, coming together to support the government in the fight against COVID-19, and that's a plus too. So all in all, get in now. And Australia's here, of course, to help.
Yes. Thank you, Ambassador Stephen. That was great. The next question is to Ambassador de la Vega. How is doing business in the Philippines different from the rest of Asia?
Well, thank you very much, Ed, for that question. But I think that what sets the Philippines apart from its neighbors is, of course, our shared history with Australia. People forget that we have common adherence to the principles of democracy, rule of law, and human rights. And we are known for our resilience and the strength of our institutions, our political institutions that have withstood crisis, whether it's natural or man-made disasters. None of our challenges have pushed us to break down. And in fact, throughout this period of pandemic, for instance, we did not impose any trade restriction, even on critical medical supplies. So we always play fair. Ambassador Robinson mentioned earlier the potential of our elections from a business perspective. Let me put it on another dynamic, and that is with our elections taking place next year, and of course this takes place every 6 years, the peaceful transition of power is always assured. You can count on us to ensure stability and transparency that has allowed our bilateral relationship to grow and expand over the last 75 years. And just to conclude by saying that when you look at the Philippines, opportunities in the Philippines are always long-term. And this has been cited by many independent institutions and can serve as solid grounds for an optimistic outlook for emerging industries in the coming years. We've heard what Neil said earlier about long-standing relationships in the Philippines. And of course, having 75 years of that relationship right now, I mean, I think speaks volumes of the kind of future that we can both have. So, and of course, finally, to add that our unique geographical advantage, and many have already mentioned this, our young, growing, and English-speaking population, and of course, the world-renowned Filipino workforce. This sets us apart and why you should be doing business and why you should be investing in the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Now, this question's for Susan Jenkins, right? Susan, are there any things you wish you knew or were told before you entered the Philippines market? What are the lessons that have stayed with you?
I suppose we try and do a lot of research before we enter a market, and I think maybe visiting is absolutely the number one thing that helps you if you want to learn more about a market. There are three things. I think what would have been good was to know a little bit better about customer preferences and price points. We didn't really understand exactly that about Philippines, and I think when we undertook our research in 2019, although it was a very small scale research, we didn't have much money, it really helped us to understand that area a lot better. Just on a side note, the quality of work done by the consumer research organisations and the people who've managed our promotions in the Philippines have really been world class. We do promotions in a few other markets, and I think that's a big plus for the talent that's been mentioned today too, is that you get very, very good people over in the Philippines able to manage these sorts of things for you. Our meetings with our also gave us a better understanding of the price points that needed to be met, given that fruit is very much a per piece sale in Philippines as opposed to most places where it's more per kilo, and that you really have to meet those price points. Understanding another thing we didn't understand, and I didn't really understand till I actually visited, was the critical role of concessionaires in supermarkets. It's quite different to the rest of Asia, where the concessionaires actually are selling the fruit within the supermarket as a private business. And that comes to the fore, especially when you're trying to organise promotions. It makes it much more difficult to do promotions in the supermarket because sometimes you'll have two concessionaires in the supermarket who are actually competing with each other, so it's very difficult to get everybody together. It's I think the very cutthroat nature of the competition within the supermarkets was a big surprise to us between the different concessionaires. Supermarkets don't often see engagement with promotional activities of being really relevant to them, also because they feel like it's more in the concessionaire's basket. They see that, yeah, we'll rent the space to you, or we'll rent this, or we'll get a bit of income out of you for doing it, but they don't see the potential to increase the sales necessarily so much. I think a better understanding of transport and logistical challenges for the transport of the fruit after its arrival into the major ports would have been useful. I had no idea that our importers had this time frame of 3 days to sell a container full of fruit. That's a very fast turnaround. It is amazing, and they do an amazing job actually. Citrus does have a long shelf life if that cool chain's maintained, But in the Philippine climate, with it so hot and so humid, if you disrupt your cold chain in any, it really does reduce that shelf life. In 2009, we did try to as I mentioned, by inserting temperature trackers into containers, into boxes of fruit, to see what happened after it left the cool rooms. The importers' cool rooms was the most, we did the whole journey. But it wasn't very successful, actually, because some of the recorders didn't have enough battery to go all the way, and several were removed because people didn't understand what they were. So it wasn't very conclusive, but it was us trying to address this issue. Even now, I don't think we really understand the logistics of how the fruit moves around after it leaves the importer, and I think that's obviously we're continuing to trade in the Philippines, and every year, and once we can visit again, that's going to open up huge opportunities for us to actually increase and get a better understanding of how we can match what we do to where the fruit's arriving.
Thank you, Susan. That was very good. In interest of time, the final question goes to Neil. Neil, reflecting on your experience in the Philippines, is there anything you would do differently? Can you give us a couple of examples of challenges you have faced, and how did you overcome them?
Well, look, thanks, Ed. There's always things you can do better, and I think that's part of entering any new investment market. You need to learn on the way through, and obviously Susan's been through that experience herself. I think from our perspective, being an Australian company wanting to do actual projects in the Philippines and invest in land and invest in buildings and invest in making things, we really should have had more funds on board when we went. Clearly, we had the investment capital to buy the land and get the initial foothold, if you like, but we needed more in the way of follow-on capital, and that's been hard to get. We've sort of gone through 2 elections over the time that we've been there, and policies do change. So you've got to be ready and adaptable for that. And you've got to have the initial operating funds, and you've got to have follow-on funds, and you've got to have access to follow-on capital. So I think they're the most important things, is to have your financial socks in one drawer, so to speak. On the next one, I think, is focus and agility. Really be on your game and be able to identify and then take opportunities that present, because they do. They present on the way around. You'll meet people, you'll be in different environments, you'll see things, and if you have the agility, you'll be able to take those opportunities and move forward, I think, pretty well. I think we also needed to be better prepared for differences in approaches to regulations and financing. Banks and government agencies do behave differently than you expect in Australia. I mean, there's a very heavy reliance on paper documents. Very little is done electronically in our experience so far. You can get some things done electronically, but there's still, notarization of every document. There's still physical exchange of documents that you need to do, and understanding those regulations is very important. And where you have a difference in the Philippine regulation and the Australian regulation, that cross-cultural friction, if you like, and cross-border friction can affect things like land acquisition, land title transfers, share issues, still actually done on paper, not like computer share or the ASX. General compliance is also more stringent in many cases with the SEC, the Bureau of Internal Revenue, audit procedures, and of course banking. So look, there's a lot to learn on the way around, but being prepared to learn quickly and being agile and having your capital lined up, I think, are all very important things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil. Thank you for your insight there. Thank you, all panelists. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have, because I'd like to obviously be on time. We regret we're not able to address all the questions submitted. However, either Austrade or Philippine Trade will contact you directly to answer your questions. Thank you, Ambassador Robinson and De La Vega. Thank you, Susan and Neil. The name of the game now with exports is diversify, diversify, diversify. The Philippines should be a target market for Australian exports of goods and services and investment. You don't have to be alone in your journey. There are many exporters and investors who have gone before you. The Filipinos are friendly. And Austrade, the Philippine Trade, APBC, and many are only eager to help you. As the Philippine saying goes, it's more fun when we do things together. Now, may I take this opportunity to once again express our appreciation to all our speakers from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the Philippine Embassy, Ironbark, Citrus, Plentex. Thank you to the Export Council of Australia for the support of this seminar. The Market Insight Report for the Philippines is available on DFAT's website. Austrade's country and industry market profiles can be found on their website. If you have any questions or require government export assistance, please do not hesitate to contact Austrade Manila. I think the contact details are there. You can also visit the website of Philippine Trade and Investment Center displayed on the screen, or you can contact us, APBC, through our website. That concludes today's session. Thank you for attending and best wishes on your business ventures. Thank you very much.